Professor of Political Science here at Roane State, and it is my honor today to introduce our speaker, Mr. Ray Smith, who is a retired Y-12 historian and the Oak Ridge City historian. He has published 12 books and produced documentaries on Oak Ridge and its role in World War II. He's also the author of the Historically Speaking column, which appears weekly in the Oak Ridger. So I'm going to hand over the podium to him.
Right. Thank you very much, John. I'm glad to be here today, and I look forward to spending some time with you. I would encourage you to not hesitate to ask questions, although I'll be presenting slides and we'll be talking from them. If you have questions about the history of Oak Ridge that you'd like to ask, I'd be glad to entertain those questions. I'll save a little bit of time at the end for questions too. But if something comes up that says, oh, I'd like to know something about that, just let me know and we'll stop and talk about it a little bit. And I'll still get you out of here on time, okay? Let's start just a little bit to talk about me so you know where I'm coming from. I was born in a little community, a little crossroads community in Middle Tennessee, about 50 miles south of Nashville, about 30 miles north of Huntsville, Alabama. It's a fine little community. I wrote a book about the history of Delina, and it's a bestseller. All 25 people that live there bought copies. So I went to Petersburg High School, married my high school sweetheart, Fanny. We had 57 wonderful years of marriage. She passed away this last February. Actually, the anniversary was last week. She had sarcoidosis. If you know what that is, you understand. If you don't, it's a lung disease, an autoimmune lung disease. And we knew if she got COVID, in all likelihood, it would be fatal. We protected her for 2 years, and then January of 2022, she tested positive for COVID. She actually got through the COVID better than we thought she would. But about 2 weeks after she'd gotten over the COVID, or the worst part, blood clots formed in her lungs, and then she got to the point that she couldn't breathe. Well, we had an understanding about that. Hardest thing I ever done in my life was to pull the life support, but she did not want to continue when she had that much of a struggle just to breathe. So that, again, wonderful time with Fanny for a long time, and I thoroughly enjoyed my life with her, and I still think of her constantly. Vietnam veteran from 68 and 69, and I'm going to tie a little bit of a story to that in just a minute. I've been in Oak Ridge 52 years, worked at Y-12 for 47 years, before retiring as their historian in 2017. I am the historian for the city of Oak Ridge. I'm a commissioner for the Tennessee Historical Commission. I'm an elder at Highland View Church of Christ, and I'm a chaplain emeritus for the Oak Ridge Police Department. That means I no longer go on calls. So I appreciate the fact that I had that opportunity for some 21 years. Now I want to tell you, Fanny and I did a lot of traveling. We went to Europe a number of times after we retired, and we enjoyed traveling a lot. As a matter of fact, we had 2 more trips planned when she passed away, and I took those 2 trips, not knowing how it would be, but it turned out to be really good for me to do that. It was good grief therapy, if you will. But at any rate, of all of the trips that we've made to Europe 3 or 4 times, the most significant one in my memory is the one that we made on a Viking River cruise in Paris, France. One day out of that cruise, they took a bus load of us, actually 2 buses, 150 of us, up to Normandy. And we were at the American Cemetery there at Omaha Beach. And when we got off the bus, the MC there at that statue said, I'd like to lay a wreath here as a part of a ceremony, and I'd like a veteran to do that. So I held up my hand. 2 other people did too. So all 3 of us went up there and put that wreath down at the bottom of this statue that you see there. And then the MC called anyone else in the audience who is a veteran to come up and let her recognize them as well. About 20 other people came up. We were standing around the statue. Said all the standard words, thank you for your service and all that. And then when they got through, the man standing right beside me just turned to me and said, welcome home. Now that's a dead giveaway. He's a Vietnam vet. We didn't get welcomed home. We didn't wear our uniforms when we came home. So I just turned to him and I said, when were you in country? He said 1968 and 69. Now if you'll remember the last slide, that's when I was there. When he said that, two other men standing right beside us at the same time said, I was there in 68 and 69. Now there's 4 of us veterans standing there, and all of us at the same time had been in Vietnam. We didn't have to talk. It didn't last but just a few seconds. But for me, time stood still. Now when we got back to the ship, Fanny had been standing over to the side, not really knowing what was going on, but she was making pictures. And when we got back to the ship that night, she was looking through her pictures and she found the 4 of us in that image. Most significant thing that I have had happen to me since Vietnam, and in relation to my time in Vietnam. This is the Omaha Beach, where they have it's hard for me to understand what that is, but I'm sure that it was meaningful to the person that made it. But 2,000 Americans died there on June the 6th of 1944. The American Cemetery is just yards from the beach, and that's a sculpture that's on the beach. And oh, by the way, Jerry, you'll appreciate this. I had a little medicine bottle with me, and I took a bottle full of sand and brought it back from Omaha Beach. So, I want to tell you about one other thing, and then we'll get into the history of Oak Ridge, but I hope you'll bear with me. This is has a good connection to Oak Ridge and is a very special thing that Fanny and me did. It was our last trip. It was to Vail, Colorado, for a private roundtable with some amazing people. And I'm still in contact with them on Zoom. It was February the 26th to March the 1st of 2020. And it started out as a history tour. I give tours to people, everything from families to 65 passenger buses. And I give them routinely. It seems like I'm doing at least once a week and sometimes twice. A whole range of tours. But then the typical things we do is we go up to the Alexander Guest House, we go to the Friendship Bell. We will do things that are generally about the history of Oak Ridge. Now, I had one in August of 2019 that called and said we had a group of 4 couples that wanted to go on a tour. So I said, sure, I'll be glad to do it. I met them at the parking lot of the American Museum of Science and Energy. They drove up in a black Mercedes van with a chauffeur. So I said, this is going to be different. I got in the van. The first thing they wanted to do was go to Calhoun's. They had rented the event center at Calhoun's, the entire center, for one table of cold sandwiches. I said, oh my goodness, this one is different. It's going to be different. So it's not your typical history tour. Well, months later, we did that tour and we got through and they had to get back and catch their airplane, so I forgot about it. Months later, I got an invitation, an email, from the same lady that had asked me to give that tour. And she said that they wanted us to come to Vail, Colorado to participate in a roundtable. And I said, they said it's all expense paid, you just have to get here. And I said, okay, I'll think about this. I looked him up on Google, and at that time he was worth $800 million. So I said, okay, he can afford it. I think I'm going. So we did hotels, meals, skiing, dog sledding, snowmobiling, all of that's paid for. Round table twice each day and entertainment each evening. So 8 to 12 and 4:30 to 7, we had the round table, each participant given time to make a presentation. All of them were engaging and exciting. I'll tell you why in a minute. Each person had a bit of uniqueness and a review of their outstanding accomplishments. And there was a roundtable discussion on each topic. And when we went, I told Fanny, I said, I'm going to get you a spot on this roundtable. And she said, oh, Ray, I don't want to do that. And I said, yeah, you need to. So I did. I told them I would give part of my time for her to talk. She worked for 35 years at Oak Ridge Associated Universities. She worked with the internal dosimetry group, and every radiation accident in the world came through their offices, so they knew what was going on about them for the REACT's response to them. So she made a presentation about that, and oh, by the way, you got to know she was the hit of the show, and I was proud for that. The kind of people we had there is this guy here is the first individual to ever earn a gold medal in downhill skiing. First American to ever earn a gold medal in downhill skiing. The guy standing up in the middle is the one that was hosting the round table, and the second person to his left is the reason that I wear this blue bracelet. I never wore a bracelet in my life. He's a retired Blue Angel pilot for the Navy. And what the Blue Angels say every time when they finish one of their shows, they come into the hangar and they look at one another and they say, I'm just so glad to be here. That's what my bracelet says. I'm just so glad to be here. He gave it to me and I've worn it ever since. So this is the round table. It's in this man's garage in Vail, Colorado. This person here is George Roane. He is from Nashville, Tennessee, owns the Roane Guitar Company, makes guitars and sells vintage antique guitars. So now I'll tell you, that was the round table, and I'm going to tell you the other people in a minute that were there. But we had these adventures every afternoon. Dog sledding. On Friday, it was supposed to be skiing. I rode the ski lift up to the top of the ski mountain and took pictures. And then I got back on that ski lift and I rode back down. Snowmobiling on Saturday. So there we are with the dog sleds. And there's the skiing that, again, I took pictures. I didn't ski. Those are the ski slopes in Vail, Colorado. All of those strips down the mountain are different ski slopes. There we are on snowmobiles. Had a great time. And then each evening we had entertainment. Now, I'm going to let you watch this and listen to this entertainment for a minute. And what I want you to look for is for a man in a wheelchair and for a young lady, a 14-year-old girl. I believe she's 2 people behind him. But you'll notice that she's walking on her knees. Her legs have been amputated. And she's walking on her knee. I want you to watch that. I'll point it out. See the man in the wheelchair. Now, three people back. 1, 2, 3. See the young girl? All right, that's enough of that. Knock my speaker off. That's all right. It'll be okay. All right, that's good. Now, what I want to tell you, and I'll go ahead and talk about that young girl. She is a Russian that has been adopted by an American family, and she was born with her legs deformed below the knees. She was on crutches and had tried to use the legs, but they just wouldn't work. So she made the decision at 12 years old, I think, or 13, to have them amputated. And now she's got prosthetics that she could put on and actually stand as tall as anyone. But she generally doesn't use them. She walks on her knees. And she's a challenge athlete. The last time I've been keeping up with her since we met, she was in China doing soccer, and she's an amazing athlete. Guy in the wheelchair is a retired Navy SEAL, and he got shot on a mission in his back. He was actually wounded by one of his own people. But he got shot in the back and it paralyzed him from the waist down. Now he's her coach. They met at this round table, and he's her coach. Now here are the kind of people: an adventure marketing professional, a fellow of both the Explorers Club and the Royal Geographical Society, a world-renowned underwater explorer, a magician and his wife, also a magician. He stole the watch off my arm and I never even knew it. A 16-year-old Russian girl who's a multi-sport featured talent athlete, a Colombian director of the largest petroleum company in Colombia, a former lead solo pilot for the Blue Angels, the Glad to Be Here bracelet, Nashville guitar manufacturer George Roane, zookeeper of the Denver Zoo, first American man to earn an Olympic medal in alpine skiing, man who unearthed the largest dinosaur ever found, the retired commander of SEAL Team 6, and the man that shot Osama bin Laden had him to come back from retirement and participate in the interview after that mission. A retired Navy SEAL, the one I told you about, he's down in the lower right there. Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs and System Chief Clinical Officer of the Traffic Health Services of Long Island. He went back from this this round table and became immersed in the COVID issues in New York City. Founder of the Celestial Seasoning Company, the tea company. Sculptor of natural history and prehistoric life models for museums, publishing, and film. Founder and chairman of the Himalayan Cataract Project. This doctor goes to Himalaya and does cataract surgery on those people over there for free. The chair of the Mayo Clinic Department of Physical and Medicine and Rehabilitation. An aerobatic pilot recognized as a legendary aviator, an Emmy Award-winning television and film producer. The Las Vegas musician who turned consultant for DOD and the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, once picked the pockets of President Carter's Secret Service staff, getting their visit itinerary, their badges, and the keys to their motorcade. And he stole the watch off my arm without me knowing it. A lifelong student of magic and sleight of hand. If you've heard of David Blaine on the internet, the magician, he put a metal cup in his mouth and had a man shoot a bullet, and he caught it in his mouth in that metal cup. This is the man that shot the bullet. Amazing bunch of people. And Ray and Fanny Smith. Oak Ridge History and Dose Estimate for Radiation Accidents. Amazing group of people that we were with. You see Fanny and me in the center up there, standing there with the man and his wife that sponsored it. What they do is they travel. They're in retirement. They go around the country finding things that they believe are of interest, and they bring 20 of them together at the last week in February every year in Vail, Colorado for a private roundtable. To be accepted in that group of people and to be able to share Oak Ridge history with them was an amazing opportunity and one that we thoroughly enjoyed. Now Fanny was a good listener, and she had dinner with this guy named Bob Lazier, and they talked the entire meal, and then we had no idea, but soon after returning home, we learned that he and his wife tested positive for COVID and was in the hospital. And then on Saturday in April, they died. He was a race car driver. And we're still keeping in touch on Zoom. Now, let me talk about Oak Ridge. And let me first talk about Oak Ridge by introducing you to this book. If you've not read The Girls of Atomic City by Denise Kerner, that's one I would recommend everyone get and read. She called me when she was thinking about doing this and said, Ray, I want to write a book about the women in Oak Ridge. And I said, okay, I'll help you. I'll introduce you to them. She came and I introduced her to one woman, Colleen Black. Colleen took over and introduced her to everybody else. If you know Colleen, that's no surprise to you. And she introduced her. She wrote that book. It's been she's been on a nationwide book tour. It's been published in in Europe in a number of languages, and we gave her the key to the city in 2014. Her book was published in 2013, and gave her a Muddy Boot Award. Now let's think about Oak Ridge together. Oak Ridge, the native peoples that were here before Oak Ridge were the Yuchi Indians, not the Cherokee. And the reason I have to say that every time is because one of my friends is descended from a Yuchi Indian, David Hackett. And I promised him that I would always make that comment when we were doing presentations. And I've done it. Valleys and ridges provided shelter and good hunting, streams for the water. White settlers began to arrive in the late 1700s. And then they did bargain with the Cherokee for the land, but Cherokee thought you couldn't own land anyway. But by 1942, 1,000 farms were located in this area and 3,000 people lived in the communities. Now this is what the area looks like. The city of Oak Ridge is up here, and then Pine Ridge separates the city of Oak Ridge from Y-12. Y-12 is in Bear Creek Valley. Oak Ridge National Laboratory is in Bethel Valley. The Spallation Neutron Source is up on top of Chestnut Ridge. And then K25 and S50 were over here. That's now the East Tennessee Technology Park. But that's the way this whole area is laid out. It's bordered on three sides by the Clinch River and on the north by the city. Now, some of the things that are in the city of Oak Ridge that I want to call your attention to, first one is the Emory Road came through here. It was cut and cleared in 1787. Now, this bridge was built on it in 1906, and it's located between the Oak Ridge History Museum and the Midtown Community Center and the Oak Ridge High School. It's on the stream that actually runs out of the outdoor swimming pool there at the corner of Robertsville and Providence Road. You can see that there's some in need of some help here. This retaining wall is leaning out. And the last time that Mark Watson made a presentation about the city, he included this bridge in it and called my name. He said, Ray Smith wants me to do something to this bridge. So I'm at least getting his attention. I'm hoping that we're going to get something to fix that retaining wall and maybe create a little park around the bridge and keep it cleaned up. Another thing of interest that you can't access, but I want you to know about it, is that there's an airway beacon house that was here in the 1920s. It's right across the street from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, up in TVA's high wire electrical lines, right in the edge of it. And you can see on the right there, they have actually refurbished it and got it written up, and now it's a history of early aviation. It had a concrete era by it, and this was before radar, and it would be lit at night, and they could come, airplanes would fly over and see that concrete and know which way to keep going to get to McGee Tyson Airport. Now, here are the communities that were here before the Manhattan Project. Robertsville, Scarborough, New Bethel, Wheat, New Hope. Elsa really wasn't a community, it was a railroad stop. It had actually been created when they were digging the tunnel through Black Oak Ridge for the railroad. But these communities are here. The New Hope community is in this picture. The people that had to leave in 1942, some of them kind of resented that they didn't think they were getting enough for their land. So this one daughter of George Armstrong, whose house you're seeing there, and that location is in Bear Creek Valley. That's the cut in Pine Ridge. The city of Oak Ridge is now right over there, and Scarborough Road comes through here. Bear Creek Road runs down there. This road is still here today. It's the East Portal Road going into Y-12. But she took a bunch of pictures, and they went to court to try to get more money. They didn't get any more money, but I got a really good set of pictures out of it. And I've used these pictures in all the documentary films that I've created. And there, it's on the poster on the wall out at New Hope Center's History Center. Now, Clinton Engineer Works is the name of what this came to be. It was first known as the Kingston Demolition Range, and they thought, oh, that sounds a little too ominous, let's change that. It didn't stick. So they called it the Clinton Engineer Works, no I-N-G. If we were saying it today, we'd say engineering. But back then, they used Clinton Engineer Works, and that's the way the Army Corps of Engineers designated their districts. They would take the largest city in the area and just call that engineer district by adding that name of that city to the front. So that's how we got Clinton, as it was the county seat for Anderson County. Oak Ridge is just named for Black Oak Ridge, the ridge that it's located on. It was a suggestion made early in the project to name the city the same name, or close name, as to what was the ridge was named. And they thought, well, that won't call attention to it because all these ridges have names of trees, Chestnut Ridge, Pine Ridge, Black Oak Ridge, so they just allowed that to be named. Now the four sites, or the three sites and four facilities that were here, X10, Y12, K25, and S50. When General Groves wrote his book, Now It Can Be Told, he noted in the book that someone asked him what these names stood, these codes stood for. And he said, I don't know. I don't remember why we used them. So X10 was the graphite reactor, is now the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Y12 was the electromagnetic separation plant, where the uranium was separated that was used in Little Boy. And it's the Y12 National Security Complex today, still having its main primary function, that of nuclear weapons. And then the K25 was the gaseous diffusion plant, and S50 was the thermal diffusion plant. Now, when they were trying to put this together, they saw that it was taking so long for Y12 to get that uranium separated that Robert Oppenheimer, who was out at Los Alamos and who was trying to get this material to him to build a bomb, told General Groves, look, the hardest part of separating this uranium is the first part, getting it from 0.7%, 235, up to 1, 2, and 3%. Once you got it up there, it moved faster. It was easier to do. So he said the Navy is experimenting with thermal diffusion. So let's get a thermal diffusion plant and build it into the process so it will speed it up. And oh, by the way, they had just built the world's largest steam plant at K25 to produce electricity for the gaseous diffusion plant, but they couldn't get the barrier material to work just yet. So they had this huge steam plant and nothing to do with it. So Oppenheimer said, use that steam and build you a thermal diffusion plant. So General Groves went to the contractor and said, I need a thermal diffusion plant. I need it built right by this steam plant, and I need it in 90 days. Remember, they thought they were in a race with Germany, so they were in a hurry to get something done. The contractor looked at him and said, that's impossible. Groves looked him in the eye and said, you've got 80 days. They built it in 76 days, operated it for about 3 to 4 months, and that was feeding material into the Y12 and the K25 process. And they calculate that it shortened the war by about 3 weeks. Now, of all of those, generally somebody in the audience wants to know, what do they stand for really, even though Groves didn't know. The only one that I know anything about is K25. The K might stand for the Kellex company that made the gaseous diffusion equipment. The 25 is known to be a shortcut name for uranium-235. They took the 2 off the right-hand side of 92, the atomic number, and they took the 5 off the right-hand side of 235, the isotopic number, and they called it 25. They did the same thing with plutonium. They took the 4 off the right-hand side of 94, the atomic number, and they took the 9 off of the 239, the isotopic number, and they called it 49. Now there's a man that's written a book named Plutonium, the World's Most Dangerous Material, and on the cover of his book he has a huge watermark of a 4 and a 9. So he knows the story. So how was Oak Ridge chosen? rural area, close to Norris Dam, inland from the sea. Some of these things were considered. Yeah, did Groves do it? Well, he did make the decision to buy it when he was here on September the 21st, I believe, 1942. Did the president make the decision? Maybe Senator McKellar had something to do with it. This starts with this letter that was written by Leo Szilard and actually signed by Albert Einstein. And they did this because they were, Szilard knew that the president didn't know him and wouldn't recognize him, but he would recognize Einstein. Einstein was a well-known scientist. So they agreed to write this, Szilard writing it and Einstein signing it. Then they used Alexander Sachs, who was a friend of President Roosevelt, to get the letter to him. And when President Roosevelt understood that what the letter said is Germany's buying up all this uranium ore, and they were afraid they were trying to build a bomb out of it, well, he knew it would be an expensive undertaking. So he put General Groves in charge of the Manhattan Project. Groves had just finished building the Pentagon, so he knew how to put a large construction project together. He knew how to get private industry involved, and he knew how to spend money. So he also called in Senator McKellar, and he said, Senator, I need to put a large amount of money against the war effort, and I can't let the press or anyone know how much it is or what it's being used for. Can you help me with that? Senator McKellar said, yes, Mr. President, I can do that for you. Just where in Tennessee are you going to put that thing? That likely had more to do with us getting selected here in East Tennessee than any ridges and valleys, lay of the land, proximity to a dam. The senator hiding that money probably had more to do with it. Now, I had the opportunity to interview Senator Howard Baker before he passed away. I took a television camera up to his office in Huntsville and Scott County, set it down in front of his desk, put him behind his desk, and said, okay, Senator, tell us about your connection to Oak Ridge. He said, first, let me tell you how that place was chosen. And he went into that Senator McKellar story in the most flamboyant way you've ever seen. When he got through, I said, thank you, Senator, for putting on video the story that I tell everyone who comes to Oak Ridge. He said, where did you get that story? I said, I got it from Dick Schmeiser, longtime editor of the local newspaper there, the Oak Ridger. He said, that's where I got it too.
Greg,
Yeah, yes, sir.
did Groves go to any other areas in the U.S. to consider it for the site?
Groves didn't, but Marshall did, all during 42. There were several other sites, one in Kentucky and others in Tennessee, that were looked at, but they didn't make the decision. Groves didn't look at any of them. He came to Oak Ridge, stopped a meeting, or got out of a meeting early, caught a train down here, spent the night in the Andrew Johnson Hotel, came over, looked at the land, said bye. Now that's the kind of man Groves was. He made those kind of decisions quickly. It is said that he would give himself an hour, 1 hour, to make the most difficult decision that needed to be made. But he would make it within an hour. So he made the decision to buy this area here. Now, I will tell you another Senator McKellar story, and I know this one's true, because the man that it happened to just passed away within the last several months. His name was Lester Fox. He's a patriarch of the Fox automobile dealerships in this area. But in 1942, he was a sophomore in high school at Oliver Springs, a little community just north of here, and he was skipping school. Him and his buddy were playing the pinball machine. Now, when they got through, they were walking down the main street of the little town. They walked by the telephone office. The telephone operator leaned her head out and said, Lester, go get the principal. He's got an important phone call. Now, Lester's skipping school, but he does. He goes and gets the principal. Principal comes over and takes the phone call, comes back to the school, calls all the students together in an assembly. Says, I've just gotten a phone call from Senator McKellar. He wants me to tell you to go home and tell your parents you're going to have to find another place to live. The government's going to take your property for the war effort. Now Lester swears that's the way these 3,000 people first learned they were going to have to get off of 60,000 acres in order to make room for the Manhattan Project. Many of them didn't have automobiles, they didn't have trucks to move their belongings. If they had a car, they might not be able to buy gas for it, or tires. Those things were rationed. What they did have is young men in the military getting killed. So they wanted to do anything they could to stop that killing and help end the war. So they got off their property, many of them in a matter of days, in order to make room for the Manhattan Project. Now, one of those families that had to leave was descended from a man named John Hendricks. Now, John was born in 1865, Civil War time, in Bear Creek Valley, right where Y-12 is today. In 1900, his youngest daughter died. His wife accused him of being the reason because he corrected the child the day before. So she got mad and left him, took the rest of the children, went to Arkansas, and never came back. This really upset John, so he prayed to God, wanting to know why this is happening to him. Heard a loud voice in one of those prayers that said, if you'll go sleep on the ground for 40 nights, you'll learn the future of this place. Now, it must have been in the wintertime, because as the story goes, his hair froze to the ground. Now, let me interrupt my story just a minute to tell you, these little communities that were here before the Manhattan Project, Robertsville, Wheat, New Bethel, some of them still have annual reunions here nearly 80 years later, well, over 80 years now. And at those, well, New Bethel has theirs on Memorial Day, and that's over next to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. There's a church over there. And the Wheat community has theirs the first Sunday in October out at the George Jones Memorial Baptist Church there where the Wheat community was. Now, I was speaking at one of these reunions a few years ago, and I was telling this story about John Hendricks. I got to the part about his hair freezing to the ground. This little lady held her hand up out in the audience. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, my grandmother put a quilt on John Hendricks when he was sleeping on the ground and fed him chicken soup because he was about to freeze to death. Now, you keep that in mind while I tell you the rest of the story with this little video.
From modest and humble beginnings to secret missions to being one of America's best resources for new technology, these valleys in East Tennessee have a rich and diverse history. We want to honor those who came before us. We want to keep our place in history alive by revealing the secrets of our hidden past. Bear Creek Valley someday will be filled with great buildings and factories, and they will help toward winning the greatest war that will ever be. These words were spoken nearly 40 years before World War II would reach into this peaceful valley, and they were spoken by a man who was considered insane by some, a prophet by others. His name was John Hendricks. At the end of the 1800s, John Hendricks lived with his wife, Julia, and 4 children near where Bull Run Steam Plant sits today. But then tragedy struck when his 2-year-old daughter died of diphtheria. Because she had recently disciplined the child, his wife blamed John for her death. Julia left John, taking the remaining 3 children with her to Arkansas, and she never returned. Grieving and guilt-ridden, John sought comfort in religion and began praying devoutly. One day, as legend has it, he heard a voice telling him to go into the woods and lay on the ground for 40 days and 40 nights. Heeding the voice's command, John lay down in the forest and prayed for a sign. As temperatures fell, a kind neighbor brought a blanket to warm John's tortured soul and fed him some chicken soup. She found him barely alive, with his hair frozen to the ground. When John Hendricks finished sleeping on the ground for 40 nights, he had tremendous stories to tell he'd tell anyone that would listen. Of course, they thought he was crazy when he was telling these stories, so they put him in a hospital for the insane. He didn't stay long, however, till he escaped, and he told the authorities God's going to destroy that place. Sure enough, his prediction came true. In a few weeks, when lightning struck the hospital, and it burned to the ground. Eventually, John Hendricks overcame his grief and married Martha Jane Gregory, who had 7 children from a previous marriage. John amazed his stepchildren with stories of his visions. He told them that one day cargo would be shipped through the air. Martha rebuked him, saying, "John, you shouldn't have such fool talk."
Mama told me a lot about him. She thought a lot of him as a stepfather. He would have to go off in the woods and get visions, he thought, and come back and tell what he dreamed. And anyway, a vision he'd see, it was going to be a big place there one day.
John's most famous predictions centered around the area now known as Oak Ridge, and here he predicted the end of World War II.
There will be a city on Black Oak Ridge. Big engines will dig big ditches, and thousands of people will be running to and fro. They will be building things, and there will be a grave noise and confusion, and the earth will shake. I've seen it. It is coming.
John Hendricks died in 1915, so he didn't live long enough to see his predictions come true. He's buried here in Hendricks Creek subdivision in the middle of the city of Oak Ridge. His predictions lived on, however, and serve as a testament to the man who had become known as the prophet of Oak Ridge.
So, General Groves was put in charge of the Manhattan Project. I would tell you that he's the key to the thing being as successful as it was. As I mentioned, he was a decision maker, and he didn't hesitate to face tough challenges. Here's what Colonel Nichols had to say about General Groves. First, he's the biggest SOB I've ever worked for. Most demanding, most critical, always a driver, never a praiser. Abrasive, sarcastic, disregards all normal organizational channels. Extremely intelligent, has the guts to make difficult, timely decisions. Is the most egotistical man I know. He knows he's right, sticks by his decision, abounds with energy, expects everyone to work as hard or even harder than he does. But if I had to do my part of the atomic bomb project over again, had the privilege of picking my boss, I'd pick General Groves. That's what Colonel Nichols had to say about him. Colonel Nichols was here in Oak Ridge. He ran the Manhattan Project day-to-day activities, with the exception of Los Alamos. He ran the Hanford Project and the Oak Ridge Project right here in Oak Ridge. They made a good team. Groves was in Washington, D.C., and he was handling the political aspects of it, while Nichols was here in Oak Ridge, running things on a day-to-day basis. This is what Y-12 looked like in 1945. These buildings are still there today. There are 9 of them, and each of them had calutrons in them. Calytron stands for California University Cyclotron. There are 1,152 of them. Well, if this thing would go in the right direction for me, thank you. Actually, it did right and I did wrong. Ernest Lawrence is the one that invented the calutrons, and this is what the ones in the Alpha Calutron buildings look like. There were 5 Alpha buildings and 4 Betas, and again, stands for California University Cyclotron. Now, see these little D-shaped or C-shaped items here? These are vacuum chambers, and they go in between the magnets. And there will be 96 of these batch processes around this magnetic oval shape. Because it's in an oval shape, they call it a racetrack. And most people immediately think something's going round and around. Well, no, what's happening is the electrical current is running to the magnets, but the actual process is between the pairs of magnets. Now, there's an easy way to think about this. There's no moving parts in a Cayutron. Think with me. If I had two rubber bands hanging down from my hand, I put a golf ball on one and a ping pong ball on the other. I held it to my side and spun it real quick for a half a turn. That golf ball would stretch that rubber band further than the ping pong ball. So I get two arcs. Same thing happens with uranium-235 and 238. There's 3 neutrons difference in the mass or the weight of an atom of uranium-235, the isotope, and 238. 3 more neutrons in the 238. So it's a little bit heavier. So when you put it between those magnets, and the magnets cause it to bend, one ion at a time, the 238 will make a slightly larger arc than the 235. So you can catch that 235 up at the top of that arc. Now the only problem is, in 1,000 pounds of uranium ore, there's only 7 pounds of uranium-235. So you've got to separate a lot of material in a lot of batch processes to get that little bit of 235 that you need for a bomb. Now I want to go back to this picture and show you of all of these 9 buildings. That's Beta 4, Alpha 5, Alpha 4, Beta 2, Beta 3, this building right here is now part of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. It will remain, and it still has Beta Cayutron racetracks, 2 of them in that building. And then that's Beta 1, Alpha 1, 2, and 3. Those will all come down eventually, but Beta 3 is going to be preserved. And also this building right here, building 9731, which was the first building completed at Y12, and it has 2 sets of magnets for alpha Cayutron, 3 magnets and 2 Cayutrons, and it has 3 magnets and 2 beta Cayutrons. Only alpha Cayutrons in the world are in building 9731. And it's a part of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park now. Now there was a shortage of copper during the Manhattan Project, so they needed to borrow silver to use as electrical conductors. Colonel Nichols went to Undersecretary Bell, Undersecretary of the Treasury, and said, look, there's a shortage of copper. We need to borrow some silver to use as electrical conductors for the Manhattan Project. Undersecretary Bell said, okay, we've got some reserve, Colonel. How much you going to need? He said, I'm going to need several thousand tons. And he said, Colonel, you don't understand. Here in the Treasury Department, we don't think of silver in terms of tons. We think of it in terms of troy ounces. Colonel Nichols figured on the back of his envelope and said, I need about 300 million troy ounces. What he got was 14,700 tons of silver, and it was used to make the windings for the Cayutrons. This gentleman right here is the man that promoted me at Y12, Dave Jennings, and he had his picture made with that silver. That chain link fence is the only thing that separated that silver. Think about $400 million worth of silver laying on the ground at Y12. You could see it from Scarborough Road. We can't even keep copper now. If it's out, people steal it. But there wasn't any of that stolen. In fact, all of it went back with the exception of less than 0.1%. Now, 67 tons of it stayed in building 9731 until 1970. And they just sent a letter every year saying, we can't send the silver back to you. It's too important. We can't shut the equipment down. What they were doing is they were separating all of the elements in the periodic table into their isotopes. First time it had ever been done. Some of those isotopes they were sending over to the graphite reactor where they were being radiated inside that reactor and made radioactive, producing nuclear medicine. Alvin Weinberg, who was the director of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for 15 years, was asked before he passed away, what's the most important contribution Oak Ridge has made to the world? without any hesitation. He said medical isotopes helps millions of people every year. Same equipment, same science that separated the uranium from Little Boy, first atomic bomb ever used in warfare, also separated those stable isotopes that were sent over to the graphite reactor to produce nuclear medicine. So this is what Y12 looks like today. I'm looking from the other direction. This is alpha 3, alpha 2, alpha 1, beta 1, beta 3. That's the one that's still part of the Manhattan Project, or the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. Then beta 2, alpha 4, alpha 5, and beta 4, and 9731 right there. Those two buildings will remain. The rest of those will eventually come down. In fact, they're moving the PIDUS fence now so that it'll be easier to have access to some of the buildings that are no longer in use. That will be taken down. This is the New Hope Center. That Y12 History Center is located just to the left of the main entrance door. And you can visit that New Hope Center and the Y12 History Center any Monday through Thursday from 8 to 4. The doors are locked, but you just go up and push the little intercom and tell them you want to see the Y12 History Center, and they'll open the doors and let you in. Just be careful and don't take any pictures outside because you're on video and they'll come get your camera. But once you get inside the building, you can take all the pictures you want in the History Center. Just don't take any outside. This is the Calytron girls that Denise wrote so much about. And the one in the lower right, this lady right here is Gladys Owens. Gladys worked here from January till August of 1945. Remember, the war ended in August, and there were 75,000 people living in Oak Ridge at that time, and a lot of them left after the end of the war. And she was one that got laid off and left. But she came back in 2004, and she saw that picture over at the American Museum of Science and Energy. Well, Steve Stowe, who was the director of the museum at that time, called me, and he said, "Ray, I found you a Calytron girl." Now that's where that phrase got started, is right there with Steve. We began to call them Calytron girls, and that name stuck. They just loved being called Calytron girls. They were called cubicle operators during the day. That was what their job was. These were called cubicles, and they were to operate them 8 hours a shift, keeping these meters on a certain point by turning these knobs. See those light bulbs up there? Those are red lights. If it got out of control, the red light would come on, and an engineer would come and get it back in control. And then these young girls, right out of high school, would monitor and just keep tweaking it just a little bit to keep those meters on the same point. Now Gladys told me, she said, "Ray, I never did know what I was doing. Of the 22,482 people working at Y12, maybe 100 of them, the chemists, would have known they were working with uranium. They wouldn't have known they were making a bomb out of it, but they would have at least known it was that heavy metal." These young girls right out of high school didn't have a clue what they were doing. They were just doing what they were told. So she said, "Ray, can you show me?" I said, "Yeah, Gladys, I can show you." So I opened up one of these cabinets, and I said, "Gladys, when you were adjusting those knobs, you were changing the value of a rheostat down here." She reached over and tapped me on the arm. She said, "Ray, I still don't know what I was doing, but I know if I had any bobby pins in my hair, they'd just go stick to the wall." Largest magnets in the world at the time. And I brought Gladys out there and took her back out to Y12, set her on a stool, and made her picture in 2004. Then she came back the next year, 2005, and helped me welcome 2,000 people into Beta 3 for the first time the public had ever gotten in there to see those Calytrons. Now this is Ruth Huddleston. Ruth just passed away this last week. She was 97. She's the last of the Calytron girls that I had that would help me in presentations. There for several years, when anyone from headquarters would come down to Y12, they would call me and they'd say, "Ray, the undersecretary or whoever, the administrator's coming." they wanted me to carry from girl. So I go call, well, I had 2 or 3 of them at the time that would come. I called one of them one night, about 8 or 9 o'clock, and I said, I've got a visitor coming, the undersecretary, whatever. It didn't mean anything to her. And I said, they need you to be out at the New Hope Center tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. She said, Ray, you don't understand. I don't get up till after 9 o'clock. But she did. She came out there and we met with whoever the dignitary was. This is one where we talked over at University of Tennessee. Ruth went over there with me and we talked to about 400 people. She had, and she was interviewed a number of times. Her oral histories are on the Oak Ridge Public Library, and they're actually online. If you go to the library, you can find some 800 oral histories, and hers is one of them. This is what General Groves had to say about these Tennessee girls. Above all, I knew the labor supply of East Tennessee was of a very high order from the standpoint of willingness to work. I knew we had to use many female operators. Tennessee girls would be much more easily trained and would do better work than those of some other sections of the country. The principal reason for this was that the women here were not sophisticated. They hadn't been reared to believe they knew it all. I couldn't say that today, but I can quote General Groves and get by with it. Now this is a picture. Ed Westcott made all these black and white pictures that I'm showing you. Made every one of them. He has 15,250 negatives on cold storage in the National Archives in Virginia. This picture was made walking out of Y12. That's Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. And these ladies are walking up toward him. He's in a pickup truck standing in the bed looking out and telling these women to walk toward me now. And now, when we cut the ribbons on the New Hope Center and the Jack K Center in 2007, I used this picture and put it in the newspaper, and I said, any of you ladies that are still alive, come and have lunch with us and help us cut the ribbons. 5 of them contacted me and came. This little lady here, Dorothy Coker, this lady here with the black sash, this lady with the polka dot dress, and this lady right here was Miss Atomic Bomb in 1945. And they came and had lunch with us. Now notice this picture shows this man just standing here. He's not walking. All the rest of them are doing what Ed told them to, but he's not. So we remade this picture to end one of our documentary films. We made the Nuclear Family. It's 4 30-minute episodes that we made for public television. And we needed a way to wrap it up. So here's what we did. We remade the picture, having people to walk away from the highly enriched uranium materials facility at Y12. And we put Ed in the picture. So Ed, you stand there, Ed, don't move. That's me walking back behind it saying, Ed, don't move, don't move. Now you can get to these documentary films. There's about a dozen of them online. Just Google Y12. And the first thing that comes up is going to be the Y12 National Security Complex. Now just follow your nose. Go to About, History, and Video Gallery, and you'll see all 12 of them there. This is what a little boy looked like, first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. And this is the X-10, or the graphite reactor, in 1945. That's the reactor building right there. And this is what Fat Man looked like. Now, notice the date on this, July the 17th, 1945. You've got Churchill, Truman, and Stalin. Anybody remember what happened on July the 16th, 1945? That's when they had the Trinity test out in Alamogordo, New Mexico. First atomic explosion ever held was right there. Now, Truman knew that. He'd gotten a telegram that said the baby arrived and everyone's fine. That was a code that told him that the atomic bomb had exploded and everything was good. So he told Stalin, we've got a bomb that's going to end the war. Stalin said, I know. this man, Klaus Fuchs, had provided the plans to Fat Man, to Stalin and Russia before we ever exploded an atomic bomb. So Russia already knew about it, were already working to build their own atomic bomb using the plans to Fat Man. Stalin wouldn't let them do anything except replicate that exact bomb for Fat Man. Now we also had a spy, had about 3 spies that were here in Oak Ridge. The most famous one was written about by Ann Hagedorn and the sleeper agent. And he was here for a period of time and then went up to Dayton, Ohio. And I'm convinced that the 2 Fuchs and the one that were here in Oak Ridge, I'm convinced that that's the reason that Stalin and Russia went after the plutonium bomb and not the uranium bomb. Because look how much, 60 cents of every dollar spent during the Manhattan Project was spent here in Oak Ridge. So getting the uranium was a really hard thing. Getting the plutonium was easier to do than that. So I'm convinced that that's the reason that they went for the plutonium bomb. This is what K-25 looked like in 1945. A half a mile from there to here, and a half a mile from there. So 1 mile all the way around it. The uranium material would go in here, go back and forth through the stages. Now this is a continuous operation, and come around and then be taken out down here. By December of 1946, the K-25 plant could produce weapons-grade uranium, highly enriched uranium up in the 90%, 235. So they shut down Y-12, all the K-neutrons except Beta-3 and 9731, which they used to produce all those stable isotopes. Actually, Beta-3 operated until 1998. This is the thermal diffusion plant, the S-50. This is the steam plant that was the largest one in the world at the time. And that's the thermal diffusion plant that was built in 80 days, 76 days actually. This is a look at the castle on the hill. This is the building that was the administration building. The federal office building is located near there now, just down there. That's where the parking lot is now. This is Jackson Square, and you can see the high school, and this is the guest house, and that's Chapel on the Hill. And there's all of these dormitories. They're all gone now, but they were here when Bill Wilcox came in 1943. He got out up there at Jackson Square, and him and the buddy were with him, and they looked at all these dormitories. They saw some of them had M's beside the front door, and others had W's. So being pretty smart, they figured out that meant men and women. So they counted the number of them, 15 dormitories. There were 10 for women and 5 for men. They thought that was pretty good odds. So this is Happy Valley. Happy Valley was built just on the south side of Highway 58. The K-25 was over here. And this is Happy Valley built over across the road. Now in 2006, the History Channel wanted to make a film about Oak Ridge. They wanted to call it The Lost Cities of the Atomic Bomb. Lost Cities of the Atomic anyway, something like that. And they wanted me to find them a lost city. So I took the mayor then, David Bradshaw, took him out to this Happy Valley location, and it's all trees now, all wooded up. All these buildings were torn down soon after the war ended because they were just construction. There was 15,000 people living out there, construction workers, for the K-25. But I took him out there and had him find an old fire hydrant, and that was our lost city of the atomic bomb. This is one of the streets. There was a lot of mud here when they were building it. And if you'll notice, that street is actually West Fonts off of Florida Avenue. Oak Ridge is laid out the turnpike is down in the valley, and Outer Drive, West Outer Drive's up on top of the ridge, and the roads that run between them are named for the states. And on each of those state streets, the street that you want to go to will have the same first letter as that street. State Street, like Florida, all of the letters will be L's. This is Highland View School. Notice these flat tops, they're all still there today. That was the school. Now it is Children's Museum of Oak Ridge. The flat tops are still there, but they're all have pitched roofs on them now, and they've got trees growing around them. Lots of trailers brought into Oak Ridge. Remember, 75,000 people living here in August of 1945. Bus system, 850 buses, 9th largest bus system in the nation. Now remember I told you about Lester Fox? Lester and his brother saw an opportunity here, so they bought 100 buses, and they created the Fox bus system. Lester said those buses broke down every day. One day he was driving a wrecker, had a bus tied on behind him. He was over in Clinton, and he saw another one of his buses broke down on the side of the road. So he just pulled over and put that wrecker right in front of that bus, got him a log chain and tied that second bus onto the first bus, put him a driver in it, and pulled out on the road. The policeman stopped him and said, "Lester, you can't do that. Leave one of those buses here and come back and get it. And besides, I want you to meet me at the courthouse at 8:30 on Monday morning." Now Lester worried all weekend about what was going to happen to him when he went to the courthouse, but he went. When he got up there, the policeman was waiting on him and said, "Lester, come with me." He took him down to the clerk's office and said, "Give this boy a driver's license." Lester was 14 years old when he got his driver's license. Lester also said he had to go over to Knoxville about every day to get parts for these buses. And he went over there one day and he couldn't find a parking place. He drove all the way around the block and there just wasn't a parking place to be had. So he pulled his truck, little pickup truck, right up on the sidewalk in the front door of the store. Got out, went in, got his parts, and when he came out, the policeman was writing him a parking ticket. And he said, "No, no, no, you can't write me a ticket. I'm from Oak Ridge. We're trying to win the war over there." The policeman tore the ticket up. The next day, Lester come back to the parts house. He didn't look for a parking spot. He just run right up on that sidewalk. When he got out, the same policeman was writing tickets. Lester waved at him. The policeman waved back. Lester never parked anywhere but in the front door. So this is Jackson Square. And if you look, these buildings are here, and they're still here today. Now these dormitories are all gone. The steam plant is gone now. And of course the federal office building is over there where these buildings are where the administration building was. These buildings are still here, and that's what it looks like today. The same buildings are there. Of course Jackson Plaza is here. That's the guest house, what it looked like in 1945. That's what it looks like today. It's a senior living center. The Department of Energy could not do everything they wanted to do out at K-25. So they made a deal. The State Historical Commission and the state historian gave them this idea. And what Patrick McIntyre, who did it, he told him, he said, "Look, if you can't do what you want to do at one place, it's all right to do something somewhere else in place of that." So they took $500,000, purchased the Alexander Inn, and stabilized it. It was in really bad shape. Then they gave it to a nonprofit organization, Knox Heritage, and they in turn gave it to Rick Dover for $1. Rick spent $8 million on it, and now it's one of the finest senior living centers with 64 units in it and a memory center in the back. And the lobby, inside the lobby, there's a historical display there that I helped them create. And I will often bring 65 passenger buses right up to that and take them in and let them see the lobby. Lobby set up, restored very much like it was. Rick Dover went to Chicago to Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill, got the original plans for the building, and put it back as original as he could. The fireplace is still there. The mantel, Robert Oppenheimer's most famous picture that Ed Westcott made of him sitting right by that mantel, I framed it and put it up on the mantel in the senior living center. Now, of course, I hadn't been able to bring them in during COVID, but I'm now taking tours back in there. Oh, I have to say Big Ed's Pizza. It has nothing to do with the Manhattan Project, but it's the best pizza in New York style pizza in the world. It's right here. Now, the building that it's in was a Manhattan Project era building. It was the Williams Drug Store. And then the American Museum of Science and Energy. I have to encourage us to think about that. And you can go online and see a lot of what's going on there as well. But the Manhattan Project National Historical Park is located at the Children's Museum, and just inside the door to your right. And by the way, they put 20 historical markers around town, and they've got 5 more that they're putting up between them and Explore Oak Ridge. Explore Oak Ridge got a grant for it, and the Park Service is preparing the signs and the wording that goes on the sign. And there's a little rack card in the visitor center that tells you the location of all of those historical markers. It'd be a good afternoon to just go get you that rack card and go around and find all of those markers. So the History Museum, Oak Ridge History Museum, when we moved the American Museum of Science and Energy from Tulane Avenue, it was in some 50,000 square feet of space. We moved it over to Main Street and put it in an 18,000 square foot space. So a lot of the exhibits could not be transferred over. So some of them were given to the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association. And then they took a lot of other exhibits that they put together, and they have an excellent museum there at the Midtown Community Center. It's have a good section dedicated to Ed Westcott. I'm proud to say that they run a continual loop of the Ed Westcott documentary film that I produced. It was the last one I produced. When I was retiring from Y12, we almost had it done. And I told them, if you'll give me the raw footage, I'll get Keith McDaniel and we'll finish it. And I did that, and we got it finished in 2017. And it's also running up at the Children's Museum in an Ed Westcott exhibit up there as well. And then the Y12 History Center, that's what it looked like originally when I was there with it. Now they've modernized it, and they've got several other exhibits there at the History Center. I would encourage you to go out and look at it. Then this is the K-25 History Center. It opened in February, the same week Fanny and me went to Vail, Colorado. They opened that museum. They closed it 2 weeks later, and it stayed closed for a year and a half. But it's open now, and it's a really good exhibit for lots of things to be seen there. There's a replica of Little Boy, and there's also one at the Y12 History Center. And then you can see what a hutment looked like on the inside. And of course, the Oak Ridge International Friendship Bell. I'm really proud of it. It's become the icon of Oak Ridge. And the Secret City Commemorative Walk, a really good way to learn about the 7 years that Oak Ridge was behind the gates on the roads coming in. This is what the Y12 History Center looks like today, with the replica of Little Boy and several patches or exhibits around the wall. Have you ever seen that picture before?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I say, I made good use of it, and if you notice in that John Hendricks film, I used it twice. So, now if you think about the national impact of what Y12 does, especially, the weapons are assembled in Pantex And the secondary, the part that has the uranium in it, goes from Oak Ridge to Pantex. Now, we made over 30,000 nuclear weapons during the Cold War. We're coming down to 1,550 by the START Treaty. And the rest of those tens of thousands of nuclear weapons are being dismantled out at Pantex, and the secondaries are coming back to Y-12, where we take that material apart. Remember, we didn't build it thinking about taking it apart. So we've got about 20 years backlog out at Y-12 just disassembling nuclear weapons. Again, looking at Y-12 today, the New Hope Center here, Jack Case Center here, highly enriched uranium materials facility there, and the 9 large buildings that were Cadutron buildings. Now, this is the largest construction project in the history of the state of Tennessee since the Manhattan Project. Building the uranium processing facility, $6.5 billion project. Here's the highly enriched uranium materials facility to be connected by a corridor. And those buildings are completed now. They're going to be occupied in 2026. Right now they're doing the security features on the inside. That's the highly enriched uranium materials facility at night. This is the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the largest laboratory in the DOE complex, and has the fastest, most powerful supercomputer in the world, Frontier. And of course, the spallation neutron source is the most powerful pulse neutron source. This is the high-flux isotope reactor, again, a continuously operating neutron source, and producing radioisotopes. The spallation neutron source up on top of Chestnut Ridge, and they already have funded a second target facility for that spallation neutron source. East Tennessee Technology Park today, all of the buildings are gone. The K-25 building is no longer there. There is a history center that's located right down at the bottom of the U. And over on the K-33 building site, Kairos Power is building a small modular nuclear reactor. That will be a demonstration for what I believe nuclear energy is going to be like in the future. Thank you for paying attention and listening to me and for questions. Any other questions you have that you'd like to know about Oak Ridge that you've never had a chance to ask Ray Smith? What would you like to know? Yes, please.
Not a question, but my uncle was a Vietnam vet.
Very good. Thank you for his service too.